So welcome to Bunny's Designs. This is a live stream with live peoples. Good morning, everybody. It's just 20 past 9, London, Greenwich Mean Time. And I've sent off one or two books from Amazon. This was a £2.99. It's an old publication, but it's a good one. So it's not up to date, but sometimes that's slightly better. And I wanted to know about the pastels. I've worked in pastels a long time ago, say in the 1970s, when I was at school, but I hadn't bothered with them so much. Now I have every art material that you could possibly want, um, but I had never bothered with them until recently when my hands have stopped working, and so I cannot hold a pen because I normally do line drawings, quite detailed line drawings, and I can't seem to find an ink pen that I can hold very well. So at the moment, I cannot draw. So I'm colouring in. And I can't use pencils for colouring in, so I can't blend pencils. And I devised a way of doing watercolouring in a little watercolour book with about 600 colours in it. But just at this moment, I cannot hold a paintbrush. So my daughter fished out some Derwent pastel pencils last year for her O-level, and my husband must have bought them about 20 years ago. And I started to play with them and thought, oh, actually, I quite like them. But I couldn't remember the rules and if I've actually made up half this or if it was real. So I thought if I send off for another book, I can actually show people in black and white exactly the properties and how to use them, what works with them, and so people can make their own mind up. Because there's a lot of people out there using them, including me, as they are not supposed to be used, and telling people different things about what they actually are. So I thought I would go through all the different pastels and then show my pastels that I physically own, what you can do with them. So this is going to probably be a series on pastels because at the moment that's the only things I can use. And because you don't have to grip them and you can basically just slide them across a page and they leave tons of colour. And that's basically what I need. So what I thought we would do is we would start off, and there's no point looking at artists because I don't know. I'm going to have a go. I bought some paper to have a go with the pastels, but at the moment I am going to go through how to use these in colour books because there are a lot of beautiful pastel artists out there who show you how to use them professionally. I am using them in colour books, in not in flat paper. But I want to show the benefits of using these to either pencils or watercolour or anything else. So that it's another way, it's another medium to use in your colour books without having to do anything to these flimsy shiny pages that we find these gorgeous images on that we want to colour. So I can physically show you what these pastels are. So the original pastels have got the dry pigment, which is the colour. So if we look on our little colour book about pigments, you can see this is a colour. This is a colour in its purest form. It's a coloured dust. And then to add tones, they add chalk. And they add gum, Tragacath, Canth, I can't pronounce that. They have in watercolor. It's gum arabic, but it's a kind of gum, and the gum makes it kind of into a paste, and then you can kind of make it into kind of a gooey paste, and then you can add more chalk to the pigment and make it into a kind of almost like a dough, and then you can roll it into sticks and let it dry. Now at the front here it doesn't show you that very well, but if you look at the back of this book, and it's a very good book, it tells you not to throw away all your little bits of chalkiness, if I can find it, because this actually explains and shows better how a pastel is made. So if you go to this page, reconstructing a pastel. So the pastels, and these are the soft pastels, these are not the hard or medium hard, these are the very soft chalky pastels that are very expensive because they have got a lot of pigment in them. So the more pigment they have, the more expensive. Very similar to any kind of watercolor, any kind of artist material. It's the pigment that costs the money. So if you have some little tiny little chalky bits, and I can show you some. Bear with me 2 seconds. Didn't really want to put that on the floor because I don't like putting that on the floor, but never mind. So last night what I did, which is why I've got bits everywhere, is I have these which were in a box that I bought from eBay, and these are professional beauty. Now they weren't this colour, they were all black, and these are unison. These are very, very beautiful professional pastels, but they were all black. They were all this colour here. And why people stop using them is they're very, very messy. Some people wear rubber gloves, but they're very messy. Hence why Derwent put them into pastel form, but we'll go there later. So these are these beautiful, soft, professional pastels, like the Winsor & Newton. But you get bits, they crumble, because they're extremely soft. They're a lot softer than the chalks you draw on a blackboard with. But if you think of how crumbly they are, and then times it by 100, you get these. They're very, very soft, and that's why they're beautiful for people who haven't got a lot of strength in their hands, because you don't need the strength. So that's what those look like. But when they go into tiny bits, you don't want to throw them away, because how a pastel is made originally is the colours. You grind them down back to a dust, which is what this is here. It's a pigment. And then you can add, it says skimmed milk here, so you grind it really down. So you could do it with a pestle and mortar, or you could do it with a flat surface. Grind the colours back down, mix the colours together, add some skimmed milk, make it into a bit of a paste, roll it and let it dry. And that's basically, instead of skimmed milk, you would be adding the gum, but that's basically how a pastel is made. So you can imagine it's extremely fragile. And that's because most of it is pigment, and that's why they're expensive. But I always say it's a bit like fairy liquid and cheap washing liquid. Although it's twice the price, it's twice as concentrated. but you get a lot all at one go. You only want a couple of drops of fairy liquid, whereas a cheaper version you'll want 5 or 6. So that's basically roughly the difference between a soft pastel and a cheaper version, which is a hard pastel. So these soft pastels are almost dust, I'll go through them when we actually touch them. See if we've got any questions. So these are the expensive, lovely, soft pastels, which I have just put somewhere. And as you can see, I buy things and I hardly use them. My daughter used these. Again, I'm too frightened to use things. I did use them. Oh no, I didn't use these. These aren't quite as soft as the other expensive ones, hence £19.99, £33. They're still beautiful, and as you can see by the package, they're still crumbly. But the other ones are twice the price because they've got the expensive more pigment in them. But they're still beautiful to use, and they will still be fab in a colour book. And I'm just looking for my other little set, which I can't seem to see anywhere. Another little set, which I actually took with me in my little art bag, are these Daily Rowney ones. And these are professional quality. And I'll go through the differences. I'm just very quickly going through roughly what each look like and what they are. So in here, again, these are extremely soft. And these are more expensive because these are professionals. And they always have a series on them. And the series is a 0 tint and a series E, tint 8. And this is to do with, again, an original pigment. Because some of these are tints and some are tones. So if you have a cadmium red is actually a pure colour. A French ultramarine, an ultramarine is a pure colour. All the greens are mixtures. So if you have a cadmium yellow, which is quite expensive, and a cadmium red, a cadmium blue, a French ultramarine blue, you have two expensive colours coming together to make a bright green. That green will be more expensive than if you'd used a chemical made up pigment. So it's not a natural one, because these are very rare now and they're very expensive. But the people are making artists and chemists have got together in the Victorian times and started making other colours, like phthalo blue. I don't think is quite natural. So again, these blues and yellows, cheaper versions, were mixed together to make a cheaper green, and that's why some greens are more expensive. If you look at watercolours, some greens are more expensive than others, some blues are more expensive than others. It's all to do with the pigment. And when you understand this, you understand more about colour, because you are having a purer colour the more expensive it is. So they're quite nice to use. So these are all soft pastels, and as you see, very, very messy. If you watch any YouTube pastelist, they've got gloves on, it's very messy. I cleaned about 6 or 7 very dirty, this is white rice, and to clean the pastels here, people store them in. But if you watch pastelists on YouTube, if you want to get into them, that's the best way to do. Not watching me. I'm just explaining what differences are. So here you put the little I haven't got a piece actually, but a little tiny piece or a bigger piece that's very dirty in plain white rice, And it's good to have a little pot, and you shake just gently, nothing too rough. And then by magic, when you open the pot, the dirt and the coloration from each other's pastels, because they do contaminate each other very quickly, excuse me, will be on the rice, as in here, and your pastels will come back to their true colour, because you're just knocking off the contaminated colour. Which I'm just going to have to make a baby wipe because it's extremely messy. It's fabulous, and it's very, if you're into colour, it's the best thing for colour you could possibly get, because it's the nearest thing to pure pigment. Now, originally I had thought about doing colour theory and making my own colours, but because you have to grind the colours down to dust, and then add the pigment, add the binder. So you want gum arabic to make a watercolour, you want tragacanth for, and apologies because I can't read, for pastel. There's an acrylic binder to make acrylics, and there's an oil binder to make oil paints, and basically everything starts off the same. It's just the binder differentiates between a pastel, a watercolour, acrylic, an oil, or anything else, or even wallpaper paint for walls in your house. But everything starts off as a pigment, as a pure colour. So they're very soft pigments. Then you get some square ones, which is very much like the ones, the Faber-Castell. And they have sharper edges, so you can have more control, and you've got lines, and you can be a little bit, you use those, all the square ones you use for your drawing, your initial drawing, because you've got some nice marks with them. And on here it shows you can get some really nice marks. So when you're doing a sketch, let's see if you can find a sketch. I think it's probably further on. That's in charcoal, but it acts very similar to the corners and the edges of the square pastels. But these are hard pastels, so they're compatible with soft ones, but it says they're mostly used in the early stages of work when a certain degree of drawing is needed. So the square ones are good for drawing, or you could use a pastel pencil. So you use them for that, and then you go in with the soft pastels to get the beautiful rich blends and tones and colours, and then you go back to these harder pencils with the corners and the edges for, it is also used to put fine details at the latter stage of soft pastel work. So again, you've got initial outline, you've coloured it in the beautiful colours that are more pigmented in the soft pastels, and then you go back to the hard pastels to define things that you want. But this was before pastel pencils. Pastel pencils do exactly the same thing as hard pastels do, and basically they are a hard pastel. They're not a soft pastel. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to hold themselves inside a pencil. They had to have a little bit extra binding. And it says here, look, we now go to the pastels. They are the same consistency as pastel crayons, apart from being slightly softer and encased in wood. They are ideal for linear work, for detailed work, and can be also blended for delicate modelling of forms. Pastel pencils come in a range of around 80 colours. So we now have the pencils, if you don't want to get your hands dirty. And then we come to these water-soluble pastels. And I would say these have a waxy consistency, can be used wet or dry, and I would guess that these are your Caran d'Ache. And that's why the Caran d'Ache are very, very good. And the Derwent art bars as well. Not the oil art bars, the water Derwent art bars. They're very similar because they're very, very highly pigmented, but they just have a small amount of a binder. So it has a little bit more of a waxy consistency, so you get more of a stronger pastel. It says depending on the amount of water applied, it's possible to vary the degree of dispersion. Water-soluble pastels are suitable for techniques of line and wash. You can also achieve interesting rich colours by drawing into a damp surface. So I loved mine. I've got some Caran d'Ache Neocolour 2s, which weren't called Neocolour 2s. They are these thin sticks here, which don't resemble them now. And they were just called Neocolours. But now you need Neocolour 2s because the Neocolours are a waxy oil base. They're a wax pencil. They are not water soluble. So in order to get water soluble Caran d'Ache, you want Neocolour 2s, and they will say they are water soluble. The other ones are not as pigmented, so they're not as vibrant, and they're not as good. You need more. So we've got the soft, crumbly, flaky, soft pastels. We've got slightly harder gum added to make a square pastel, which is good for linear. And then we've got the pencils, which are the same consistency, but they have the wood around them. And then we have the water-soluble pastels. And they are basically pastels in a most pigmented way, so they're quite expensive. You can get cheaper forms of all of them, but they will have less colour in them. So you will use more and you won't get rich, vibrant colours. So, equipment. The mouth diffuser. The first time I used that, I sucked, I didn't blow. Not a good idea. I think they're banned now because they're very bad for you. We have scalpel, masking tape, fixatives, sandpaper, used to file the blunt ends of hard pastels, and pastel pencils. So if you didn't want to buy anything expensive and you wanted a point, you will buy some household sandpaper, and I would get fine to extra fine. I wouldn't go any rougher than that because you'd end up with no pastel left. Probably will tell you a bit later. Yeah, it says if you purchase sandpaper from a hardware store, be sure to buy a finer grade. Oh, there we go, you see. I'm not such an idiot after all. I can remember some things. So blending, cotton bud, small torsion, large torsion, cotton wool. And one thing I had forgotten, which we used, is soft white bread. If you ever want to know how bad white bread is for you, pull the crust off a white slice, screw it up into a ball as tight as you can and let go. And you will end up with something resembling this. It just looks like a soggy white mass. And that's what it does in your stomach. It's very bad for you, but everybody loves it. But it says the most thorough eraser of all is bread. If you need some fresh bread into a soft ball, and it has to be white, into a soft ball, it will be ideal for erasing areas of soft pastel. Dry bread is unsuitable as it doesn't lift the particles and can damage the paper fibres and scratch the surface. So you want a slice of soft white bread crust removed, scrunched up into a ball or into a mass, and then you can use that. Putty rubber. I would think those two are very similar. The putty rubber is a malleable one, but another one that I saw a lady use is white tack. Blue tack and white tack works very similar, because blue tack is quite cheap and putty rubbers are, I mean, they're not very expensive, but once they're used, they're kind of used. Can't find any white tack. I had some handy. And cotton wool. So these are your blending tools. A plastic eraser tends to smear the pastel work, but is good for thorough cleaning the paper surface after you've lifted an area of pastel off by using bread or a putty rubber. So basically, if you have a few layers of pastel, you need the bread and the putty rubber to get the pastel off, and then the plastic eraser will then, the ordinary hard erasers that we use, they'll kind of take off, as if it was a pencil, they'll take off the last layer. Baby wipes or wet wipes are used additional to studio, particularly when they're working outdoors. You can use them to clean your hands between colours, to wipe down your materials, and to minimise the amount of dust you inhale. And actually, I found that by accident. I made that up by getting a baby wipe and putting it at the end of my work. So when I blew, the dust went straight onto the wet baby wipe and it wasn't going anywhere else. So again, I'd actually remembered this from there. And the other thing I was quite surprised is that I used tracing paper because I couldn't find my other papers. And it says tracing papers are used to cover a pastel work and protect the surface from accidental smudging. Both are available from artist shops. Well, actually, you want the children's supplies in Wilko's because they're £1.12. Or because I went to the children's in the range, the adults was about £5, but the children's was £1 something. But it was actually better quality. It was really nice, thick, crunchy paper, tracing paper. So brushes, both are used for applying and removal pastel. They are not as efficient as bread or putty rubbers for lifting off colour, but they are effective for retrieving the tooth of the paper surface if it's filled up with pastel. So remember what I said about the tooth of the paper is like this. If you can imagine, it's like this. So the first layer is your base colour. So if you were doing a wash, an acrylic wash or an oil wash, if you were starting out, you want a basic outline of colour. That's your first layer. And then you have tones. You have shaded areas, highlighted areas, then you had mid-tones, then you have finer detail of highlights. And by the time you've finished, you've filled up this tooth. It's full of colour from the basic layer to the top. And then right at the top, if you've kind of got 20 layers, you can't get any more because it'll just slide off the top. And that's very similar to what happens when we colour in a colour book. We've got no tooth, it's just shiny. So that's why you can actually brush off a little bit of colour to get back to a tooth so you can add more detail. But this is for professional pastelists. This isn't for colour books. But we'll come to some of these techniques we use. It says some pastelists prefer firm bristles for making corrections on larger works. I mean, we're talking 5 foot, 20 foot. A watercolour brush. Well, I don't use a watercolour brush. I use a rigger because I find watercolour, if you're using a watercolour brush, you have to use watercolour paper. And that's fine if you're printing out your colour image, your colour book image on watercolour paper, but there's no need. If you just want to take a book and your pastel pencils with you, you can just take those and be chilling out colouring. You don't want all this mess, you don't want all this palaver. Colour books are not as stressful as being a pastelist. An artist's work is never really pleasurable. It's a long time until it becomes pleasurable. Believe me. But right, we're not going to talk about oil pastels because we're not going to use them in colour books. But this book is very good for going through how to use them. Colour selections. Now, I did actually buy a book called The Colour Wheel with Colour Pastels. and I didn't expect this to be in here, but when I first started with my pastel pencils, I said that I had a portrait set. And manufacturers bring out selections of either landscapes which have greens and blues and russets, so you can do all your hedges and your fields and your trees. And they do a portrait set. I mean, they do other sets as well, but they do a portrait set, and the portrait set has all the colours you would find in a face, some greens and blues, soft pastel colours, pales, so all the colours that you would want to create a face. So you can find portrait sets and pastel sets and landscape sets. And then this comes to greens. So every colour has a range of colours. So I found my little, what are we doing for time? So inside my Winsor & Newton colour chart, Artist Soft Pastels, this is a colour guide. And this works very similar to other colour guides, but it is slightly different. So you have different variations, like I was saying about how expensive things were. They have different grades. Now the Winsor Reds and the Scarlets are kind of a purer pigment, so they're a little bit more expensive. But what you need is very similar to the if you look in your Neocolor 2s or your Derwent pencils, you have a dark red, but next to it you will have a lighter red, and then you will go to pale. So that was what happens with pastels. You have one colour, and then you have the tints, and the tints of a Winsor Red, you normally have about 3 to 5, is the amount of chalk. So it's the same pigment, it's just got the different amount of white chalk to it, so it takes it down. So if you had a cadmium red watercolour, you would add water to it to get the pale tints without adding white. If you had an oil paint or an acrylic, or a gouache, you would add white. Different stages of adding white give you different tints and tones, and that's just by adding white. And that's in the pastels. So you've got from one colour 5 tones. You can also blend them with white if you want. If you only had that one, you could blend these. And again, it's a good idea to take one particular colour book page, photocopy it, and then play on the photocopy paper, which is quite shiny. If you can master that with pastels and pastel pencils, once you've done one page, you can pick any colour book up, even the Bennett Klein's, which is quite thin paper. Beautiful designs, but paper thin, literally. But you can still get the same pastel effect because we're just working on a shiny surface. And if you're playing with colour on a piece of photocopy paper, it's not precious. You're not going to ruin your book. You can kind of really experiment blending and mixing, and that's what being a colourist is all about. And then you can find things that don't work and find things that do work, so when you come to work in your colour book, you're set to go. You can open a page and not worry, oh, what if I do that colour and it's the wrong colour. You think, well, actually I've already done that and I quite liked it. I'm going to do this page like that. So that's the advantage of always doing one full page. I did that with the Colin Thompson. It took me 2 days, but I sorted out a lot of colour. It mainly was colour. I sorted out a lot of colour questions and colour practices, and my first page was the best page I'd done, but only because I'd done one before. So it's always a good idea, and especially with a new medium, it's always a good idea to have a play. You can play in the first page of your book, because normally that's kind of always a practice. And now the colour page people are putting practice pages at the back, so you can practice with your colours. But I would still suggest a photocopy, because the photocopy paper is quite thin. So you might have 3 colour books. One's got very, very expensive thick paper, one's got very, very thin paper, but it's still a beautiful colour book. If you do it on paper, on photocopy paper, it will give you an idea of the thinnest paper. You can still work it. And you can still work the same way with the thicker paper. But at least you've practiced on the thinnest. And that's the important thing. And say, once you've done that, you can pick any colour book up and not have to worry about the amount of water for damping or the amount of colour, how to blend it in, because you've already done it. So it's talking about colour ranges. So from one green you can go from olive greens to pale greens, it's showing up, to teals. So there's a vast range, and you use different ones in different ways. But when you're a colourist, as in the modern colouring in books, we tend to break every rule in the book, and that's fine. That's what we do. We are playing in our colour books, and we are not taking any notice of all the old masters and all the old rules, because we're just playing with colour. If you're using pastels in a traditional way, you couldn't put your whites under, and you've got to layer in certain ways. But it's a colour book, and we're not layering. The one thing we are not doing in books is layering, because we do not have that tooth. We have to get all our colours that we need on a page next to each other rather than on top of each other, so that when we blend we get beautiful tones. So what they have here is a colour wheel. It says the inner ring contains a warm and a cool pastel of each of the essential primary and secondary colours, plus a single mid-orange. I don't think it means a single mid-orange. So we've got a pink. Is it a pink or is it a purple? It's a pinky purple, and then we have a darker tone. The greens, pale greens, and then a darker green. So that's probably the green you start with. That looks like a French ultramarine. So we've got a purpley blue and a different blue. This one looks like a cobalt, and that looks like a celerium. So we've got a mid blue, and you get the two. The purple is again probably French ultramarine and Elysian crimson. So you've got a bright purple. Then we've got the pale purples here and a darker purple. The orange looks like a mid-tone orange. Then you have the paler yellows, the paler greens. So I mixed a lot of these colours when I used 3 colours, 3 from printer inks, and I got 630 some from a celerium blue, a very bright blue, a very bright yellow, the lightest, brightest yellow, and the reddest, the pinkiest red, the magenta. And again, colour print, messing about with colour with printer inks, you've got to be careful you don't spill it, because it's not very nice stuff. But £3.50 for 3 printer inks in bottles, and I made 600 colours, and I found out how to make all my lovely olive colours and russets and fawns, and so you can play about with all the different colours with printer inks, and I quite enjoyed that actually. I'm not even going to go into the different types of paper, because there's no point. We are playing on very fine paper. Now what probably might happen is, once you fall in love with pastels, you may want to then start drawing, colouring on watercolour paper, flocked pastel card, canson paper. The ingress is a bit thinner, The other one, good one, actually the cheapest one, which has quite a good tooth, is brown paper, and it has a natural. The other thing with pastels is you really need a mid-tone to start with, so you need a fawn or a light tan, because you want to work with all your paler colours and all your darker colours. So all these won't show very up well with white, but they'll be fab on this colour tone, a mid-tone. This book actually tells you how to prepare paper. But again, we don't want to know this. I'll just go very quickly through this. Watercolour is even textured, suited for more controlled blending than heavier texture. The ingress is very popular, comes in an extensive range of colours and has a pronounced texture of parallel lines. Canson comes in an attractive range of colours and has a stippled textured effect. So you don't get the lines. You don't get lines like this one here wouldn't have worked as well. This is grainy. Flocked pastel board, it produces a soft effect which lends itself to subtle blending effects such as I can't even pronounce that. Sfumato. Okay. Glass paper. The exceptional tooth on this makes it suitable for heavy impasto work in which pastels is applied thickly. So, you could probably go through a pastel in one. This is almost like, it's glass paper that you use for sanding. So you would go through a whole pastel probably one sweep. It would disintegrate very, very quickly. Watercolour paper is with a rough texture, can sustain heavier treatment. So you could print out your pages in pastel, but you would use a lot more colour, and it would be a lot dustier than the way I work. But watercolour paper is probably quite a good one to start with, because then you can start using a wetter brush. It depends how you want to work. If you go back to the watercolour brushes, you can use these as a watercolour. So for a background, you would use the pastel on its side like this across, and then you would use a brush and you would wet it. I think it shows you how to do it. So this actually shows you in this book how it says it's well worth experimenting with textures and colouring your own supports. So that means you can mix. You want an orange pastel powder with and you can mix it with gesso as well. But I would not really do that. I think it's too kind of messy. Nowadays you can buy paper. You can actually buy paper, unless you're going to go into Pastels properly. Then it tells you a little bit about artists and different ways that used them and what papers and boards they used, ways of working, storing your paintings. Never roll a pastel work up, as the tension will seriously cause the loss of your pastel on your paper. So if you roll up your pastel work, all your dust will fall off, basically, because you're disturbing it. And then we have, it's quite a good book. It gives you different ways of sorting things out, composition. This is not for colouring, as in a colouring book. Again, sketching. You see how really loose it is, and I'm not really loose. But I do have a very large brown roll of paper that I bought to do some brown paper flooring, and we changed our minds and had some lino put down. So I might actually go on to there. Blending, tools you use, your finger, cotton wool, all sorts of things. Oh, it does show you putty rubber. A putty rubber is very similar to blue tack and white tack. Cotton wool, soft cloth. But this is for pasteling. This isn't really for what we want it for. But you can still use the same. You can use the same techniques, but you just need to use them a lot less. If that makes sense. Hi Suzanne, welcome to Bunny's Designs. I'm just going through a pastel book which I found about, again, you see you can sketch out, then use your softer pastels, and you just put your highlights, then you put your shadows and your low lights, and then you blend them together, or you don't blend them together. A lot of pure pastels never blend. Scumbling means the build-up of pastel paintings in layers, and again this is what we cannot do. We have to fit our colours next to each other on one level and then blend. We don't have this beautiful way of working. Again, unless you want to. But the more you use, the more pastel disintegrates, and it will go through, disintegrate. But it's a very good book if you want to go through something. And again, this is dry wash, this is making dust, and this is what I do. I scrape the dust or use the dust, and I'll show you very quickly what I did. In the bottom of those little plastic trays was a lot of black, or not black dust, but the dust from the colour range that I'd put them in, even though I've never used them. So these are the bits. I don't know if you can see the bits. And it was dust, so all I did was just add water to it. Here, these are big bits. But as soon as and this is really kind of, it looks like a mini desert, it's quite ridged is that. But the colours, because they are so pigmented, these are like your most expensive watercolours now, because the colours are beautiful. And they will go back to dust there, but once you use them on a colour page, they will not go back to dust. That has become a watercolour. Oh, my light has gone so bad, sorry. Whoops! Yeah. So that excites me because I have some gorgeous colours, and I can't mix colours at all. Now, I have to remember not to tip it up. I nearly bought another one of those, and then I thought of a tight Yorkshire last, and I didn't, and I wish I had now, but never mind. So we will never get back to this stage, but this shows you just how a pastel is actually made. And then you can explore texture, but this is when you're working on a different thing. And then it goes into oil pastels, which we don't really want to go. Now this is soft pastels and water. So you can have your soft pastels on dry paper, soft pastels on wet paper, and pastels on dry paper wetted. So it says these swatches show the same soft pastel colours used in 3 ways. The first row shows pastels applied in the normal way to a dry paper. The second shows marks made on wet paper in which the pastel colours have absorbed some of the water and so seem thicker, more like a gouache paint. And in the third, the marks have been made on dry paper and then wetted to a brush so that the pigment particles have dispersed to the support, so that means to the water. So that means that if you wet your paper and put your pastel on, you will have an opaque, thick layer. If you put a little bit of water, pastel on and then wet it, you'll get a watercolour effect. And that's very much, so they're different. They are not opaque. They are as different as you would want them to be. So pastels are not opaque unless they're added to wet water. They become like this. That's not opaque. It is there, but it isn't here. Sorry, it will not show that. Sorry, the light's really bad today. I've got a flash now. Let me just have a bit of a play. Is that better? Or is it that one that's doing it? lost the light now doing that. Oh, brown paper flooring is, you get brown paper and you screw it up. If you Google it, not if you Google it, if you look on YouTube, brown paper flooring. I have a concrete floor, which is in not a very good state, and you can use you can brown paper and you screw it up, and you can either stain it or you can leave it. And the girls spent a long time. I did the understairs. There is actually a video. I did a video on it. Understairs, and I did the pantry floor. And you use PVA glue, builder's PVA glue, and you kind of screw it down and then glue your floor, stick it down, and then all the crunched up marks that are in the brown paper show through, so it looks very stippled, like a stippling effect. But yeah, have a look at YouTube, brown paper flooring. It's the cheapest way to do your flooring, and now you can actually do it with coloured paper and all. So people are doing all sorts now. But when I did it about 6 or 7 years ago, we just had brown paper. So I bought this huge roll of brown paper to do the entire floor. And because I was ill, they said, "Oh, you can't do that, mother." So, little rabbit trail there. So soft pastels and water. So I might use a baby wipe, actually. So what does it say here? The use of water with conventional soft pastel techniques creates surprising and dramatic results. You will need to have a fairly heavy watercolour paper taped to a board to stop the paper from buckling and tearing. Now, when you do proper watercolour, you have a board, and you dunk your watercolour, and you need a big dish for this, or a bath or a sink, and you dunk it, and then you hold it in one corner for 10 seconds. You get the opposite corner, and you can't really touch it very well, and you hold it in the other corner so that drips back. So then the water is dispersed evenly. Then you lay it on your board flat, and you put proper brown paper, and again that's torn and wet, and then you use a cloth to spread it out. Now, a gentleman called Paul Taggart does a very good demonstration on, I think it's on YouTube. I have an old video of his, and then you go around all the corners, and it's flat, and it dries. It takes overnight to dry. Then you can throw as much water as you want on that watercolour paper, and it does not buckle. That's the proper way to set. I might actually do that. I might do that one day. It's the proper way to set watercolour paper on a board. And then you can do washes on it, and you can do all sorts. There's a lady that's had it down about 10 years. Depends how rough you are. One of the ladies has got dogs like me. You've got to be very good at putting it down first. My understairs wasn't as good as the pantry the second time. Polyurethane as well. Some people use the polyurethane. Again, I've got a full tin of that cost me £60 that I haven't used. Polyurethane is another way of doing it. So you glue it down, then you put polyurethane over the top. And then one lady in a bathroom put glitter, so she had like a sparkly marbled effect. Some ladies have done marbled countertops in the bathroom. You have to have a look on YouTube. What you can do with brown paper is amazing. It's fab. Yes, so you want to put your paper down first. You couldn't do this. And you shouldn't really be doing watercolours unless you put your board down properly. Unless you put your paper down properly. I don't think I have a board up here. I might have to bring one up. A drawing board. You want a wooden drawing board or a flat door, anything that's flat. I don't think it would work with this. I might try it, but I don't think it will work on a mat. Because I don't think the things would adhere to it. It's proper watercolour wet tape. Oh, there might be a Barcolette. So you need to put that down properly, and then you can put your water in. So this is a really good, whoopsie, this is a really good, and then preserving and framing. And again, a lot of people do not Yes, if it's easily disturbed, every time you take the painting down, you knock colour off. But um, a lot of purists do not spray. Oh, hi, DRD Mom and Suzanne. Welcome to Bunny's Designs. Anybody else have missed? Having a waffle. So, carborundum powder and sand and ground pastel. Oh, that's for oils. So again, the glossary at the back is very good, but I only showed you that particular bit. Right, so it says here, pastel dust. Soft pastels generate a good deal of dust, although the pigments that are used in their manufacture are carefully regulated so as to be non-toxic. It's still best to avoid inhaling the pigment powder as far as possible. Working outdoors presents no health risk. Oh well, that's what I said I was going to do, is work outdoors. If you are working indoors, however, make sure your room is well ventilated. Tap or blow away the excess powder from your painting and vacuum the area if it seems to be getting particularly dusty. But if you spread this is a dirty kitchen roll, but if you spread a damp baby wipe or a damp kitchen roll or a damp tea towel, but you have to keep it away. If it touches your book, it'll crinkle your book. So you need to keep it away from your book. So when you blow, all that dust particle should land on that space. And you don't blow mad anyway, you just blow it off or brush it off with a very soft brush. But when you touch a brush on it, it will smudge. Tap or blow away the excess powder of your painting and vacuum in the air if it's particularly dusty. You might prefer to use a dust sheet and shake it outdoors after you finish working. So I plan to use my pastels outside. But I will say something else. I am not using the pastels in any traditional way. So dust doesn't come into it, really. But it's a really good book to tell you about the pigments, the colours, and the different variations. So it's called the DK Art School, An Introduction to Pastels, in association with the Royal Academy of Arts. It's an old book. I bought this from eBay second hand. Oh no, was it eBay? I think it was. Or it could have been, it might have been. I just looked and it was $2.90. It was $2.90 something. But the only reason I'm doing this is I'm normally sketch with black ink, but I can't draw anymore. And it doesn't look like this thumb is coming back any day soon. So the reason I'm using these is I can still be creative. So that's quite a good book, and as I say, the pastel Winsor Newton set, and these are soft. So what you can do is, if you only have one of each colour, you can still mix the colours. You can mix them in a little dish and make a watercolour. Now I intend to do that. If I can start to use a paintbrush again, I intend to take all the beautiful colours I have of my pastels and my pencils, and I intend to make watercolours in little white puddles, in little tiny puddles in my watercolour book, and I've got another few hundred. So that should be good. Very quickly, we've seen the soft ones, and again, I've had these a long time. Which was the Royals? Which was the Royals, Suzanne? Oh, yes, your boy. Oh, he's back under the table again, bless him. He's back under the table. So these are harder. These were in the box that I bought from a little man for £28, or a lady, from eBay, and the box was huge. And there were all these things in. I bought those, but these were in. All beautiful, expensive pastel paper pastels. I didn't buy the Winsor & Newton ones, but what I want to show you is, so I bought this weekend. Oopsie, let me move this out of the way. A second. Oops, one's dropped out. So the reason my desk was a bit dusty is when I got home, well, before I went away, I was getting a bit excited about pastels again and getting a bit more arty. Because I do get very, very fed up colouring in other people's work, because I'm supposed to be an artist. But anyway, that's the story. This is light pastel paper with light colours. And remember what I said about not what was I going to say? Not having a white background, because you want to put your pale pastels on and they won't work. So the reason my desk was so bad is I had a lot of cheap, and some were from the pound shop, some for the works. These are, I put them in here, and they're really, really very, very nasty hard ones, but they are beautiful for doing the majority of work. Now this one's crumbled because I've dropped, and I've tried to put them in colour. So these are the softy ones, the beautiful, expensive, what did I call them? The Unison colour. These are very, very, very expensive. I've lost all my light now. I've lost all my light. So these are very expensive, but you touch them and the colour. But the beauty of these is I can actually hold this and get a little bit of colour. So I thought they would be really good for my arthritis. But all these little boxes here were all almost black yesterday because they'd contaminated each colour. So I've put them into rice and cleaned them. I have some Conti colours as well here. These are good for sketching and for outlining and for doing all your work. It's a neutral colour. So if you were, when you're sketching out, instead of using charcoal, if you didn't want to do a dark line, you would use the Conti colours here. And I've only just opened this, but I'm going to give this one to my daughter. So they're very similar. So you've got some tones, you've got your highlights, your shadows, and your two drawing tones. Very, very good. No, this has nothing to do with pastels. The brown paper, you want to Google brown paper flooring, and also on YouTube, brown paper flooring. And that's using brown paper to make a hard surface for your floors to walk on. Completely different, but you can use brown paper for pastel work. It has a little bit of a tooth.